For many students, the pandemic has been a setback for education, despite some adaptations in remote learning. Among those adaptations was an effort to give access to art for learning as well as for social emotional needs. To tell us about that effort are two of the nonprofit collaborators in Boston, the CEO of EdVestors, Marinell, Rousmaniere, and the managing director of Open Door Arts, Nicole Agois. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for having us.
Right. I want to start with Marinell. At EdVestors, you're not exclusively focused on the arts, but it's a very important part of what you're doing for students. Why are the arts so important?
Such a great question. So we're a school improvement organization, and we work across issues of seeding good ideas coming from schools, spotlighting school improvement, and then looking at issues that we can help bring people together to close opportunity gaps for students at scale. And the arts is our longest running effort in this vein. More than 15 years ago, we're hearing directly from schools that they saw arts education as a way to engage students, as a way to build a positive school climate, and to bring families in the building, which are all core to any kind of student achievement, right? To have students engaged and feel welcome in schools and have their parents involved. And so because of those individual school ideas that bubbled up, we saw the possibility of a real system approach to make a difference. And so for over a decade, we've played this lead partner role with the BPS, with funders, with nonprofit partners like Open Door Arts, and the school leaders and teachers to work at scale to make sure that every BPS student had access to arts education, and have made great progress in that vein over that decade. And then when the pandemic hit, we knew that we needed to continue and pivot that support so that those opportunities would be as available as possible with students now in a remote environment.
Nicole Agois, you focus on students with learning disabilities, and I guess this probably covers a spectrum of goals, whether it's about social, emotional needs, or even just opening the door to a sort of an educational strong suit for some students.
Yeah, so Open Door Arts, we're an affiliate of Seven Hills Foundation, and our mission is to promote access, participation, and representation by people with disabilities in the arts. And the way we do this in schools is through a program called Cool Schools, which partners teaching artists with classroom teachers in the classroom during the school day, obviously in the virtual classroom recently. But it is focused on not only providing opportunities for students to learn art, but also providing opportunities for students to learn anything through this new lens of the arts, which opens new opportunities, new doors for students to be able to interact with academic content in a different way, to show what they know in a different way, to engage, to feel valued, welcome members of the community. We work with students with all different types of disabilities. So learning disabilities, like you mentioned, students with physical, sensory, developmental, intellectual disabilities. So very, very much the wide range. We also work with a lot of students that don't have disabilities, but for whom inclusive practices are just as important. And for whom having that outlet, that social emotional outlet that you're mentioning also is extremely important. And since the pandemic hit, we transitioned our programs online, in partnership with our schools, and have seen how even more critical it's been for our students to have that outlet and that opportunity, and how important it is for us as educators to continue to really consider those inclusive teaching practices, because there's a lot of barriers that can also present themselves when you're transitioning online. So just making sure that those opportunities continue to be available to them. And I just wanted to add that we've been a grantee of the BPS Arts Expansion Initiative at EdVestors since the pilot round. So we've been with them from the very beginning.
Marinell, tell me about what has been going on over the past few months in Boston, because you were helping families overcome barriers to just getting hold of supplies, but you weren't just dumping supplies. You were helping people use them, and maybe in collaboration with teachers as well.
Absolutely, and the story of getting art supplies to young people in the city is really the story of the collaboration that has been at the heart of BPS Arts Expansion. It really started with Nicole sort of making a call to us and to the BPS Arts Department saying, what can we do? Can we, you know, get some art supplies together and get them to some students? It led us to call a couple of our funders that have been close into this work who were immediately interested and responsive. And then as we looked at the challenges of both what those supplies would be, right, in other circumstances, we'd get, you know, 25 people in a big room and put together kits, but that wasn't possible given social distancing, and especially a couple of months ago. And so we went back to a national relationship we had through the Crayola company, who had been part of some national arts education work that we had done, who were ready and willing partners to try to make accessible these very high quality kits that were not only had supplies that students could use with teachers while online, but had sort of family engagement elements to them, videos in Spanish, and were things they could do with their families. And then lastly, thinking about how to get them to students, it was our relationship with the city that really brought the YMCA and Boston Centers for Youth and Families and then their meal sites as a way to get them to thousands of students. So you know, making all those things happen over the last month has been truly a joy because everybody's had a role to play, and we were able to bring all of those pieces together to get almost 8,000 art kits out to students over the last month.
Nicole, normally when you offer inclusive education to students with disabilities and other students in the same room, it's kind of labor intensive. It's a lot about hands-on, but how do you do that virtually?
That's a great question. And I think that's one of the first barriers that we identified after we transitioned to online learning. So one barrier was making sure that, you know, students had access to computers and internet, which I know BPS was incredible at working towards, but also understanding that there were a lot of barriers in the technology themselves. So doing a lot of work with our teaching artists, we actually developed a resource called 7 Tips for Accessible Online Learning that we use to train not only our teaching artists, but a lot of other educators all over the country actually around what does it mean to transition to an online platform in an accessible way, making sure you take the needs of your students with disabilities in mind. But then, you know, just talking about the art kits, another big barrier was that we were putting out all of this online arts instruction, but we had no idea what students had access to. So our teaching artists were really creative at the beginning to say, you know, we're going to be working with found objects, anything you already have in your house, clothing, you know, recycled materials. But we wanted to make sure that the opportunities for them to interact with quality art supplies were still there, and that if we were putting out opportunities that students had what they needed to be able to fully participate. And that's one of the reasons why you know, it became such a big priority to make sure that we put those kits in the hands of students. One of the things that we really liked about the kits that Crayola had is that they include something called Model Magic, which is an air-dried clay. So some of that could be used, for example, to make grips for art supplies. So for students who have might have mobility issues or fine motor skill issues, they might be able to make grips and make those materials accessible. So it was a really you know, interesting effort to make sure that the right kinds of supplies got to our kids.
Marinell, you don't have to be a full-time artist to know what it's like to be fully absorbed in producing something in at least in the direction of art. But what have you heard about the experience of students and parents from this program?
Yeah, we've heard a lot, primarily actually through, you're talking about BPS Arts Expansion writ large and the ability to...
What's been going on over the past few months with the learning.
What we've heard primarily through teachers and principals and school leaders about the importance that arts experience has had in this online environment of having a way to build in and augment student experiences so that they have that creative outlet. You know, moving to Zoom and remote learning was a massive shift and a big challenge, and you know, didn't have the same relational experience at its ease. And so that having art teachers Zoom in to the classroom with regular classroom teachers and making work come alive through arts experiences that were connected to books that they were reading or activities they were doing, really made a difference in feeling that level of engagement and students sort of showing up and wanting to do that sort of creative work. We saw that really come to life with that the BPS Arts Department put up arts challenges every week so that students actually crowdsourced and sometimes with their families, dances and songs, and were able to share that in a platform even wider than what would be typically available in their school or classroom. Were some of the bright spots and silver linings of about what's possible even as we move through this. So it really is about that engagement that all of those constituents have told us has been so important.